Throughout history, humans have devised some of the most terrifying and brutal punishments imaginable. From medieval torture devices to inhumane executions, these punishments were designed to inflict maximum pain and suffering. In this video, we will explore some of the most dangerous and horrifying punishments ever recorded in history. Viewer discretion is advised, as some of these methods are not for the faint of heart. Let's begin. Number 15. The Pear of Anguish. This pear-shaped weapon was called by the chalk pear. Its conditions were met in 1626. This sinister-looking device is said to have been used in medieval Europe as a method of torture. The pear of anguish was designed to be inserted into a victim's mouth, rectum, or other body openings. Once inside, the torturer would twist the screw, forcing the metal segments to expand, stretching flesh and causing unbearable pain. Some believe it was used to punish liars, blasphemers, and women accused of witchcraft. But here's where the mystery deepens. There is little solid historical evidence that this device was actually used for torture. Number 14. Judas Cradle. The Judas Cradle consisted of a wooden or metal pyramid-shaped seat, supported by 4 legs. The victim was stripped naked, restrained, and slowly lowered onto the sharp point of the pyramid. The tip would be inserted into the victim's anus or vagina, with their body weight increasing the pressure and pain. To intensify the suffering, executioners sometimes added weights to the victim's legs or rocked them back and forth, increasing the torment. The goal was not immediate death but prolonged agony. Some victims were left for hours or even days, enduring unimaginable pain before dying from infection, exhaustion, or internal injury. This method of torture was not just physically excruciating but also psychologically devastating. Victims experienced intense humiliation, fear, and hopelessness. In many cases, they confessed to crimes they didn't commit just to end the suffering. The Judas Cradle was a tool of power and control, ensuring obedience through sheer terror. Number 13. Breast Ripper. The breast ripper, also known as the iron spider, was a medieval torture device specifically designed to mutilate and destroy a woman's breasts. It was made of iron and had sharp, claw-like prongs that could be heated before use to cause even more pain. This device was often used as a form of punishment, interrogation, or execution, targeting women accused of crimes such as adultery, blasphemy, or witchcraft. But how was it used? Let's take a closer look. The breast ripper was designed to cause maximum pain and mutilation. The iron claws were clamped onto a woman's breast and then pulled apart, ripping the flesh and muscle apart. If used while heated, the pain was even more excruciating, often causing severe burns and infection. In some cases, the device was used in public to set an example, ensuring that other women feared breaking the law. Victims often died from shock, blood loss, or infections, making this one of the most horrifying torture methods in history. The breast ripper was mainly used during the medieval and early modern periods, particularly in Europe. It was commonly used by religious and judicial authorities to punish women accused of moral and sexual crimes. Women accused of witchcraft, adultery, heresy, or even acts of defiance against men were often subjected to this horrific punishment. It was a brutal way to enforce fear and obedience in a society that sought to control women's behavior. Number 12. Empalement. The Assyrians used impalement as a method of execution and psychological warfare, often displaying the impaled bodies of enemies to instill fear. Impalement was a method of execution designed to cause extreme pain and prolonged suffering. Here's how it was typically carried out. Preparation. The victim was often stripped of their clothes and sometimes tied or restrained to prevent escape. The stake used for impalement was usually made of sharpened wood or metal. Positioning the victim. The victim was either forced to sit or stand over the sharp end of the stake or, in some cases, lowered onto it. The stake was often aimed at the rectum, vagina, or abdomen, though it could pierce through other areas of the body, such as the chest or back, depending on the method used. Slow impalement. In many cases, the stake was slowly inserted, ensuring that the victim did not die instantly. This was done to prolong the suffering, allowing the victim to die over an extended period, often hours or even days. Number 11. Flaying. The victim would be suspended by ropes, and their arms and legs would be tied to different pulleys. These ropes were gradually tightened, pulling the limbs out of their sockets. As the victim's body was stretched and pulled, their bones would be torn apart. It wasn't a quick death, it was slow, agonizing, and cruel. The flaying was primarily used for those who were considered enemies of the state or individuals who had committed serious crimes. Those caught in this horrific method often had no chance of survival. It was a form of both public spectacle and punishment, meant to instill fear in others. Over time, as societies began to evolve, methods like the flying G's were abandoned in favor of less inhumane punishments. However, it serves as a grim reminder of the cruelty humanity was capable of in the past. Number 10. Fork. The fork, as we know it today, originated in ancient times, but its widespread use didn't happen until much later in history. Early forms of forks were found in ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome. However, they were quite different from what we use today. The first recorded use of a fork was in ancient Persia, modern-day Iran. These early forks were used for cooking, serving food, and sometimes for eating, but they were not common household items. The fork as a utensil for eating gained popularity. In Byzantium, Eastern Roman Empire, around the 4th century AD, early forks were much larger and had only 2 or 3 tines. They were often made of bronze, silver, or even wood. These forks were used primarily for serving food rather than eating. They allowed people to handle food more hygienically, especially meats, which were difficult to handle with bare hands. Number 9. Death by sawing. Death by sawing was a brutal form of execution in which the victim was hung upside down, often by their legs, while a large saw was used to cut them in half. Unlike quick methods like beheading, this process was incredibly slow and painful, designed to cause maximum suffering. The victim would be sawed starting from the groin area and down through the body, with the saw cutting through bones, flesh, and organs. The victim would usually remain conscious for a significant amount of time, suffering from immense pain and shock until death eventually came. What made this form of execution even more terrifying wasn't just the physical pain, it was the psychological torment that went along with it. Victims knew that they would endure a slow and agonizing death. The sight of a giant saw, ready to cut through their body, would often leave them in a state of absolute terror and helplessness. Number 8. The brazen bull. The brazen bull was an ancient Greek device designed for torture and execution. It was made of bronze, hence the name brazen, and shaped like a large bull. The victim would be placed inside the hollow structure, which was designed to resemble a bull. The bull itself was intricately crafted with air holes and a series of pipes that transformed the victim's screams into a sound resembling the bellowing of an angry bull. The device was large enough to accommodate a person inside, and once the victim was trapped inside, a fire was lit underneath the bull, heating the metal until it became intensely hot. Once the victim was locked inside the brazen bull, a fire would be set beneath it. The heat would gradually increase, causing the metal to burn and scorch the person inside. The victim would die from either the intense heat, suffocation, or shock from the extreme conditions. The design of the bull, with its pipes and air holes, would amplify the victim's cries, creating a terrifying and macabre spectacle for those who watched. The screams of the person inside were transformed through the pipes into a sound that was said to resemble the bellowing of an angry bull. This added an eerie and chilling aspect to the punishment, as the screams seemed to echo from within the metallic structure. The man who made this device thought the king would reward him, but the king punished him first. Number 7. Thumbscrew. The thumbscrew punishment was typically used on individuals accused of crimes, especially during interrogations or trials in medieval times. It was often applied to force confessions from suspects or to punish those considered guilty. This form of torture began in the medieval period, particularly around the 16th to 18th centuries. The method involved a metal device that would be screwed onto a person's thumbs or joints. The screws were tightened gradually, causing increasing pressure on the thumb or finger joints. As the screw was turned, it would crush the joints, causing excruciating pain, nerve damage, and potentially breaking bones. This could lead to permanent injury. Number 6. Iron chair torture. The iron chair torture was a brutal form of punishment used mainly during the medieval period, and throughout the Inquisition it was applied to accused criminals, heretics, and suspected witches who were considered threats to authority or the church. It was a metal chair with iron spikes on the seat, backrest, and armrests. The victim was strapped or tied to the chair, and their body was forced into contact with the sharp metal spikes. The spikes would pierce into the victim's skin, causing severe pain and injury, especially over long periods of time. The purpose of using the iron chair was to extract confessions from suspects, especially during religious or political trials. It was primarily used to intimidate and break the will of the accused, making them confess to crimes such as heresy, witchcraft, or treason. It was also used as a method of punishment for those considered to be Number 5. Coffin torture. The victim was forced into a small, confined coffin-like structure, which was often a wooden or metal box. The coffin was usually very small, and the person could be forced into a sitting or lying position. Strapping and confinement. The victim's body would be tightly strapped or chained inside the coffin, leaving them unable to move freely. The box was often sealed shut or locked. Number 4. Buried alive. Buried alive was one of the most horrific and cruel forms of execution and torture, used primarily during ancient and medieval times. This punishment was typically reserved for individuals accused of severe crimes like treason, heresy, or witchcraft. The condemned person would be placed in a shallow grave or pit, sometimes just their head exposed or sometimes completely buried. As they were covered with earth, they would experience intense suffocation and panic, struggling for air, often leading to death by asphyxiation or slow suffocation. Number 3. Rank killing. In it, a person would be tied to a piece of wood and his hands would be cut off until it was cut. Number 2. Rattorude was a horrific method of torture used in ancient and medieval times, where rats were used as instruments of torment, often in combination with confinement or extreme fear. This method was typically employed to extract confessions, punish, or intimidate victims. The victim would be confined in a small, often cramped space, such as a cage or a locked box. The victim might be strapped or tied down to prevent movement. A live rat would be placed on the victim's body, often on the stomach, chest, or legs. Sometimes rats would be placed in a cage against the victim's skin, with the opening directed toward them. The rats, driven by hunger or fear, would begin to gnaw at the victim's skin, digging into the flesh and causing extreme pain. In some versions, the rats might have been forced into the body. Number 1. The breaking wheel. The breaking wheel was a gruesome method of execution and torture, used during medieval times. It was often associated with public executions and was used to punish criminals, traitors, and those accused of serious crimes. The victim was often stripped of their clothing and then tied to a large wooden wheel, also known as the execution wheel or breaking wheel. The wheel was typically a large, spoked wheel like the ones used on wagons, but in some cases a flat structure was used. The execution. The victim would be laid down or tied to the wheel. In some cases, the executioner would use a heavy hammer or iron bar to break the victim's limbs, arms, legs, and ribs, effectively breaking them before placing the body on the wheel. The victim might be left in a position where they were exposed to the public, suffering for an extended period. After the victim's body was broken, they were often left hanging on the wheel, either on display for the public or as a form of torture until death occurred. The victim might suffer from shock, blood loss, and internal injuries, leading to death. Execution and death. In some cases, the victim was left to die on the wheel after being broken. In others, the executioners would finish the process by either decapitating or suffocating the person. The death was often slow, painful, and drawn out.